Hello, Nikunja. Thank you for taking the time to speak with me today. I'm excited to learn more about you and your experience.
Yeah, sure.
Great. Let's begin with the first question. Can you explain the difference between inline, internal, and external CSS? What are the advantages and disadvantages of each?
The two types like inline and external CSS is like external CSS is like we used to create a file of a CSS file and used to import in the HTML, but the inline CSS will be like if when we write the CSS in the directly on HTML elements.
That's correct. Inline CSS applies styles directly within the HTML element using the style attribute, while external CSS requires a separate file to link to the HTML, providing easier management for larger projects.
Yeah.
Internal CSS, on the other hand, is written within a tag in the HTML document. Could you also share your thoughts on the advantages and disadvantages of using each approach?
Actually, if we write advantages of the inline CSS is to write if we write CSS directly in inline, it's easier to write. But for if we wanna manage large code bases, inline CSS is not feasible because it's not like readable or manageable. But I mostly prefer like Tailwind CSS, a class-based utility-driven Tailwind CSS type CSS. That's why I don't prefer either inline or the like external CSS as well.
Thank you for explaining that. You made a good point about manageability and readability. Tailwind CSS is indeed highly efficient for utility-driven styling. I'll touch more on that later. Now, can you describe the box model in CSS and its components? How do they affect the layout of an element?
Are you talking about div element?
Yes, exactly. The box model in CSS applies to elements like divs and others. Could you explain its components and how they impact the element's layout?
Yeah, padding is like when we try to manage the size between the elements and the border, but the margin will be like if we wanna manage the size between the outer elements and the border.
Exactly, that's correct. The box model includes content, padding, border, and margin. These components work together to define the space within and around the element. Thank you for explaining that. Shall we move on?
Yeah, sure, why not?
Great. Can you tell me what the purpose of Tailwind CSS is and how it differs from traditional frameworks like Bootstrap?
Tailwind CSS is the mobile first CSS library, and it's also a utility library which allow us to write classes directly on HTML element, and it's actually very modern technology and most of the big company use Tailwind. So that's why it's worth using Tailwind because we can able to manage even in a React.js like framework where it used to write custom classes. For that it's help us to write classes very easily.
That's a solid explanation. Tailwind offers flexibility with utility-first classes, making it faster to design compared to the pre-styled components of frameworks like Bootstrap. It sounds like you have good familiarity with it. Let me ask, how would you approach making a website responsive using HTML and CSS for different screen sizes and devices?
As I have said earlier, like I mostly use Tailwind, but if I would use like direct vanilla CSS or normal CSS, I would use like media query for different screen sizes, but which is not much feasible for me because it's pretty easier to maintain this kind of media queries in Tailwind CSS.
That makes sense. Tailwind simplifies responsiveness with predefined classes for different screen sizes. Media queries in vanilla CSS are more manual but still effective for controlling layouts. Thank you for sharing your approach. Moving to the next question. Can you explain the concept of semantic HTML and why it's important?
Uh,
Could you give a few examples of semantic HTML elements?
Actually, I don't know this correctly. Actually, can you explain me about this? Actually, I am not much familiar with that. Tell me.
Of course. Semantic HTML refers to using HTML elements that clearly describe their meaning and role in the structure of a web page. For example, are all semantic as they tell the browser and developers what the content inside is meant for. It improves accessibility, SEO, and code readability. Does that help clarify?
Yeah, it's pretty much clarify. Can you give me some example of semantic elements?
Absolutely. Some examples of semantic elements are, and these elements clearly describe their purpose on the page, like navigation or footer content.
Are you talking about anchor tag?
Anchor tags are actually not semantic HTML elements, they're functional. Semantic elements include things like and because they describe the structure and meaning of content. Does that clear things up?
Yeah, it's clear.
Perfect. Thank you for clarifying that. You've been doing great so far. I believe we've covered everything I planned to ask today. Do you have any questions for me about the role or the company?
Actually, I'm getting for I have prepared for the full stack developer. Did you just take the front end question for me?
Yes, today's focus was primarily on front-end concepts. However, the full stack role will cover broader aspects during the interview process. If you have any concerns, HR can provide more details about the full process. Thank you for mentioning that.
Thank you for calling.
You're very welcome. Thank you for your time today, Nikunja. It was great speaking with you.